Okay, so benefit of cloud solutions. So a lot of customer asking what are the benefits when they are moving the application from on-premises to the cloud infrastructure. So before I answer those questions, I simply ask, okay, how you manage your hardware, what happens when there's a critical application down due to hardware failure? What happens if the hardware is end of life or end of support? And what happens when your hardware is failed and you're following up your vendors to get it replaced? What are the disaster recovery scenarios you have when the complete data center is inaccessible from the users? So these are the questions coming up when you're planning and understanding the cloud benefits. So the first thing is the cost. When you're availing the services from the cloud service provider, you're only availing the service. You don't need to worry about your hardware procurement process, upgrading, patches, installations, and OS license, and also the disaster recovery. What happens the hardware failure you're chasing with the vendor? So these are the things you don't need to worry about. You're only availing the services, and you only worrying about what kind of hardware is required for your applications to run. The other benefit is the flexibility and scalability. I've seen a lot of companies, they're working on the off season and the peak season. So what happens when there's a peak season, they are upgrading the hardware, creating multiple virtual machines to have a better performance. And what happens, there is an off season and you're not availing the full services from your servers or your applications or your data center, but those hardware are still running, and the usage is very, very low. So from the cloud services point of view, if you're planning for scalability or you need more hardware, more virtual machines, you can simply request and you can pay as per your requirement. And if there is off season, you don't need those hardware, you can simply go for a decommissioning of those servers, and you don't need to pay for those services which are already decommissioned. The security. So other portion is like the security. A lot of people asking like what happens from the security point of view if something happens to my applications or servers, or there's a denial of service attack, or your website is hacked. So in the traditional culture or in your infrastructure, you have your own IT who's managing and keep monitoring your services, but it's again they have to be proactive in terms of understanding what kind of attack or what kind of issues arrive on your infrastructure. But in the cloud, they have their own IT service, they have core IT, and they have a dedicated team, and then a respective tower who are managing and identifying the risk, and are also managing the security point of view. Something happened to the infrastructure or the site is hacked, or there's a denial of service attack, so DOS attack. So they have their own IT expert who are taking the decision based on the attack, and they have their own SLAs to fix out those issues. So before you understanding the kind of issues in your infrastructure, they have their expert to fix those issues. So these are the common scenarios when we are planning or understanding the kind of benefits is coming from cloud solutions. The other benefit is a disaster recovery. So suppose you're running an applications on your VM, and all of a sudden your VM, your hardware which is in your infrastructure is failed. So in your infrastructure, you have own disaster recovery, you're managing it, and you have your own change process to manage your situations and then fixing your issues. But in the cloud services, infrastructure, they have their own SLAs, and based on the customer's needs, they have their own setup. So suppose if there's any hardware in the cloud infrastructure, they have their own redundancy method. It's based on the server level, based on the application level, based on the infrastructure. If complete data center is isolated, they have own disaster scenario when the complete data center is isolated or move from one locations to another locations virtually, and it will be very transparent for the customer to realize there is a disaster recovery happens, or the complete data center is inaccessible and it's accessible from the secondary server or secondary data center. The other benefit is the pay-as-you-go. As I mentioned in earlier, you're availing the services for the cloud is as per your need. So if you're availing a services, you're only paying for as per the usage. You're not going for the infrastructure procurement, or you're not buying anything. You're just availing the services from the cloud, and once your services is completed, or if you're availing the services, and if you're ending your subscription, you're only paying for the service availability, not for your hardware, infrastructure, license, or operating systems. So these are the benefits we have to keep in mind when we are understanding the benefits and when we are planning for an infrastructure to move from on-premises to cloud infrastructure.